and welcome back to WebHeadGaming. Today, we'll be taking a look at a unique game about a ghost detective that's trying to solve his own murder. And that game is Murdered Soul Suspect. Murdered Soul Suspect is an action stealth game, and I say stealth very loosely, that was developed by Airtight Games and was published by Square Enix in 2014. The game came about because Square Enix wished to appeal more towards the Western market. Yosuke Shiokawa, a creative director at Square Enix, came up with the idea of a game where the player was a ghost and pitched it to Airtight Games. Airtight then came up with various concepts surrounding the ghost idea before eventually deciding to go with a ghost detective concept. So let's start off with the story. The story takes place in Salem, Massachusetts, and it's about a former street thief turned detective named Ronan O'Connor. During the first 10 to 15 minutes of the game, Ronan gets killed by the infamous Bell Killer, who has been killing various girls in the town. Ronan himself becomes a ghost and is reunited with his dead wife, although the reunion would not last, as Ronan must now solve the case of the Bell Killer in order to be with his wife again. He befriends a living girl named Joy, who is actually a medium who can see ghosts. Joy is searching for her mother, who was working with the cops on the Bell Killer case, and so she unwillingly teams up with Ronan to stop the Bell Killer and find her mom. The story, I feel, is good. It has some high and low points, and it does have some clever twists and turns. The pacing is fast, and it actually goes by really quickly. I also like the use of the infamous witch trials in the story, as it gives off this really creepy vibe, especially considering who the main antagonist is. The characters are decent, but I don't find them memorable. Ronan isn't particularly the first protagonist in a game that had a situation where he lost everything and is now trying to redeem himself, but I think he was alright in the role of the main character. Joy is pretty much your typical sidekick female character, much like Ellie from Last of Us or Elizabeth from BioShock Infinity. Personally, I didn't think she got much character development in the game, but she's tolerable. Overall, the story is quite enjoyable. It did a good job with the dark atmosphere, and it definitely felt terrifying at some points. It's probably the best aspect of the game. The gameplay is different compared to most other games. Instead of a super soldier, or a warrior, or a street thug, or a mascot cartoon character, you're playing as a ghost detective. And as such, you can do ghostly things like pass through objects and walls, possess certain life forms, toy with different machinery, and teleport from one place to another, although this doesn't come until later in the game. You can't pass through all kinds of stuff though, as ghostly matter can block your way, but there are usually ways to get around them. The basic objective is finding clues in an area in a similar fashion as LA Noire, although it is much more simplified. When finding clues, you can interact with different objects and people. You can possess certain people and do different things with them. You can read their minds, influence them to remember certain events to your favor, or occasionally peek at the things they are looking at. You'll find yourself doing this a lot throughout the game to get various clues. It's a bit challenging to find all the clues and answers at first, but once you memorize the location of all of them, the investigation sequences become a cakewalk for almost every playthrough you do after your first playthrough. The game does have some stealth sequences, but they aren't really stealth sequences since they are very easy. During specific parts of the game, when you're escorting Joy, all you have to do is poltergeist a few cameras and machinery to distract the cops. These stealth segments with Joy are so easy that I think it's impossible to fail them. In fact, now that I think about it, this entire game feels way too easy to complete. All you're really doing is finding clues, then go to the next area of interest. Rinse, and repeat. The only real challenging part of the game is when you enter stealth segments with the demons, as they can harm and kill you very quickly. For these segments, they give you dimensional holes to go in and hide from the demons, and you can actually execute them from behind with a simple quick time event attack. It's the only time in the game where you are put into actual combat, but it's just as simple as everything else. The demons are easy to avoid for the most part, and there are actually ghost birds you can use in certain areas to distract them and kill them from behind. It's not all that thrilling, but it serves as somewhat of a challenge to first-time players. There are also these large hell pits that can drag you down to hell, but they are easy to avoid, and you can always do a quick time event to get out of them when you're caught. Aside from being very easy, I have two major issues with Murdered Soul Suspect as a whole. One issue is that it's way too short. The main story can be beaten in less than a day, and I personally wish it went on a lot longer, so we could have saw the full potential of the story. The other issue I have is that I feel that the core gameplay wasn't executed as well as I hoped. It had potential of being a lot of fun. You're a fucking ghost, for crying out loud. But I feel that they never went all the way with it. It felt way too simple, and I personally feel they could have presented more ideas and gimmicks to make the gameplay more intriguing than what it was. Aside from the main story, there are actually several items to collect, as well as many cases to solve throughout the game. It does add for some replayability, and I'll be honest, it's fun to collect the various items and solve many cases in the game as they tell their own little stories. Overall, the gameplay is simple and harmless, but it had potential to be far better. The graphics are pretty good for the 360 version of the game, but the frame rate is rather crappy as it constantly drops when loading a different part of the city. I never played the other versions of the game, so I don't know if they have the same frame rate issues. Other than that, the visuals are pretty good and nicely detailed. The music is pretty creepy and fits the tone of the game, and the voice acting is pretty good. Unfortunately, I don't know anybody who voiced the characters, so if anybody knows who's who, let me know in the comments. Overall, I had fun with Murdered Soul Suspect for the time I had with it. It's pretty short and it lacks difficulty, but the story was interesting enough for me to push through. I just wish the overall gameplay was more interesting than what it was, and the game as a whole could have went on a lot longer. Despite its shortcomings, I commend the people at Airtight Games for giving us a fresh new idea. It's a decent game that is well worth your time if you feel like trying out a different type of video game. Final score, 7 out of 10. Till the next time, as you take a look at Gundam Battle Assault.